Hi, Sean Munger here, That History Guy, and we're doing historical context of the James Bond movies. This is number 8, Live and Let Die, which was made in 1973, the first film to star Roger Moore as Bond after Connery departed the role for the last time, unless you count Never Say Never Again. The 1970s were very difficult years for the Bond franchise. I believe this film, Live and Let Die, together with the next one, The Man with the Golden Gun, marks the absolute low point of the series. What's fascinating about these two movies is how they reflect society's confusion about the 1970s, a mean, scary, and bewildering time that was very different than the decade that had come before. If you think about it, James Bond is really steeped in the culture of the 1960s. The playboy, jet set, glitzy glamour stuff with fast cars, beautiful women, funky gadgets. All of that seems a little out of place in the 1970s, which is a decade marked by economic recession in the Western world, political corruption, sexual confusion, terrorism, and cultural stagnation. The book, Live and Let Die, was one of Fleming's first and lesser novels. It wasn't really very good. It was published in 1954. The producers chose this title to do next because the story featured an African-American villain, Mr. Big. And in 1972, when production started, black actors and artists were highly visible, especially in the United States. Indeed, some film historians talk about a black film boom in this period, referred to a little more cynically as the blaxploitation era. Probably the most famous of these movies was Shaft from 1971, but a series of films featuring African-American leads and stories followed, particularly in the next year, 1972. In that year, you had Sounder, Trouble Man, which was pretty much a knockoff of Shaft, Blackula, and Lady Sings the Blues. The era jump-started the careers of numerous African-American performers and artists. Richard Roundtree, who played Shaft, Robert Hooks, Pam Grier, Richard Pryor, Morgan Freeman had his first film role in 1971, Paul Winfield, Louis Gossett Jr., Billy D. Williams, Diana Ross was nominated for an Oscar for her role in Lady Sings the Blues. The list is almost endless. The actor they chose for Mr. Big in Live and Let Die was Yape Kado, an absolutely fascinating man, best known for his performance in Alien at the end of the decade, but he was a seasoned thespian at the time he was cast in the Bond series. He is to date also the only black Bond villain. The film also features Geoffrey Holder, who later appeared in the original Annie and was probably most recognizable as the pitchman for 7-Up in the 1980s. The Bond girl this time out was Jane Seymour. In her first film appearance, she later appeared on the show Dr. Quinn, Medicine Woman, and the cult sci-fi romance Somewhere in Time, one of my favorite movies, and she's certainly one of the most beautiful actresses of the era. And of course, as Bond, we have Roger Moore, who was actually about a third-string choice for the role. When begging Connery to come back didn't work, the producers looked at Michael Billington, a British actor, Julian Glover, who later turned up in the Star Wars and Indiana Jones franchises, and even if you can believe it, Burt Reynolds, who told them no, Bond should be portrayed by an Englishman. In my personal opinion, Moore is by far the weakest of the actors who's ever played Bond. Even though his performance did improve over several more films, in Live and Let Die, he's clearly outclassed by the rest of the stellar cast. The main plot of Live and Let Die involves drugs. Mr. Big, the villain, is essentially a drug dealer. Drugs, particularly heroin, had become a huge social issue by the early 70s, and in the United States, the first moves in what would eventually be known as the war on drugs were taken by the administration of Richard Nixon. Although Bond fighting drug dealers would be used again in the series, most notably in License to Kill, my second favorite Bond film, in 1973 it seemed like kind of a desperation move. Spectre is now gone from the series, and it's clear that the producers didn't want to engage with political topics, so drugs linked inextricably to urban decay and other social problems, some of which you see glimpses of in the film. This was kind of a reluctant go-to for a series that seemed by this time just about out of gas. So, with the exception of exploiting the prominence of African Americans in show business and the almost accidental concern with drugs, Live and Let Die seems terrified to embrace its historical context. While the film was in production, the United States finally withdrew its forces from Vietnam. The Watergate scandal was developing, which would lead to President Nixon's resignation the next year. and unemployment and IRA-related terrorism were still huge problems in Britain. The film refuses to do anything with the Cold War, which was entering an interesting phase in 1972 and 73. Détente, supposedly the warming of relations between the West and the Soviet bloc. Nixon had several summits in this period with Soviet leader Brezhnev, while at the same time the Soviet economy and society were just beginning their death spiral. Live and Let Die refuses to touch any of this. Indeed, watching the film, you have a sense not even of the fun escapism of films like You Only Live Twice, but more like kind of a fearful hiding under your bed because you don't want to face anything kind of escapism. What's interesting about Live and Let Die is how much it mimics television that was popular at the time, which of course is escapism in its basest form. The whole last third of the film, almost the whole last third of the film, is a chase sequence involving cars and speedboats. It goes on and on and on and on without ever advancing the plot. Chases were big in the early 70s, following the dare of the iconic movie car chases in Bullitt from 1968 and The French Connection 1971. Car chases after that became a staple of American TV, principally on shows like The Streets of San Francisco. The chases in Live and Let Die seem much more like the monotonous small-screen car crash stunts on TV than they do like those groundbreaking movie chases of Bullitt or French Connection. Watching Live and Let Die is kind of like watching a bad show on TV. It's just rather dull. So Live and Let Die is really a huge missed opportunity, but the Bond series had not yet hit rock bottom. That was to come with the next film. I'll do that one in the next video, but all I'll say about it here is, de plane, boss. Thanks for watching.